What is up, creatives? This is Tom. Welcome back to another video. Now, this is one of my old cameras. This is the Nikon D3200, and it's actually one of the cameras that I originally bought about 7 or 8 years ago when I was getting into YouTube kind of semi-full-time for the first time. So pretty much I thought it'd be a fun video to compare this camera, this sort of 8-year-old DSLR, to this camera that I'm shooting on right now, the Sony A7III. This is the camera that I use for all of my professional work. It's obviously a great piece of gear, but it's interesting to sort of get an idea or a comparison of the bumping quality that you can expect from buying a more expensive piece of gear. So without further ado, let's get into it. So to kick things off, physically there's not an enormous amount of difference between these two cameras. They're a kind of similar weight, and whilst the Sony definitely feels more premium, uses more metal in its construction, this Nikon is about 8 years old and still very much holds up. For this comparison, I'm going to be using the Sigma 30mm f1.4, which on its crop sensor on the D3200 ends up being about a 45mm focal length equivalent, and on the Sony, I'm rocking a 55mm Zeiss, and that's a 1.8, so it is a similar lens comparison. First of all, a really important point is that the Sony A7III is a full-frame mirrorless camera, meaning that its sensor is full frame, so shoots with a larger field of view than this Nikon D3200, which is a crop sensor DSLR. With the Nikon, there's a mirror which reflects light into the sensor. With the Sony, no mirror. Neither option is necessarily better, but mirrorless cameras have got really popular in recent years because they're generally smaller cameras, but still get the same great quality. I have a full video breaking down crop sensors compared to full frame sensors, so click here for that. Jumping straight into some video image comparisons, here's a side-by-side piece of video I shot on the D3200. It was right at the end of my shoot, gathering kind of a ton of B-roll for this video, so the light was disappearing fast, and I thought it would make a great comparison because obviously when you spend a bit more on a camera, things like low light performance is a great improvement in what you'd expect. To start with, you can definitely see quite a lot of noise here in the shot from the D3200, and the dynamic range really isn't that great. But overall, I actually feel like the picture is pretty decent. Now let's throw a super quick grade on there, and you can get an idea of the final picture. So now let's look at the shot taken on the A7III. Again, we'll chuck a quick grade on here because I shot this in S-Log, and there's definitely noticeably less noise, and the dynamic range is certainly better. But it's definitely what you'd expect from a modern prosumer camera. Now we'll throw it back to the D3200, and back to the A7III. And I think you'll agree with me that the shot is obviously a lot better on the Sony, but that the D3200 really isn't being like totally walked over. I'd actually say that one of the biggest differences, obviously aside from just the overall picture quality, is the difference in resolutions and frame rates. On the A7III, you can shoot 4K or 1080p at 120 frames a second. This means that as a filmmaking tool, you just have more options, and the 4K resolution also results in a better quality of final image. On the D3200, you're stuck with either 24 frames a second or 30 frames per second, and both of those max out at 1920 by 1080. You can see here that the performance of the D3200 is definitely better in a night light situation, versus that disappearing light of the previous shot. It certainly isn't outperforming the A7III, but it does close the gap just a little bit on final picture quality. As discussed though, we do have the significant difference to be able to throw in some higher frame rate slow motion without degrading quality on the A7III, and there's definitely been a notable improvement in camera performance over the last few years. So let's take a look at some photos now taken on both cameras, and I think this is actually where the D3200 closes the gap just a little bit. Again, I'm not going to get ahead of myself, but you can still take some really great photos on a now really cheap DSLR like the Nikon D3200. In terms of colors and details, sure, I think the A7III definitely takes the edge, and again, you'll definitely be seeing a benefit if you happen to be shooting in a lower light situation, because a more expensive camera like the A7III will perform better in low light. Another note is that the bokeh in the background is just more pronounced, less noisy, and generally more attractive on the Sony, but you can still get some great shots using the Nikon. Alright, so now we've kind of compared some of the shots taken on the D3200 to the A7III, so you have an idea of the camera's different qualities. And of course, if we were weighing up a clear winner here, the A7III is pretty much a better camera in almost every single way. This is just a more illustrative point that after 8 years, a camera like the D3200 is definitely still usable and could be used on a variety of different projects, especially if you're looking maybe to just start shooting your first YouTube videos. On eBay you can pick up a D3200 for around about $150 and the A7 III is about $2,000. The barrier to entry is extremely high to start shooting with something like this, and I know it's very intimidating when a lot of your favourite YouTube creators shoot with cameras like this or much more expensive ones. I basically made this video to give you some practical examples about why older and more affordable camera options are still a great bet if you're beginning to start shooting video from amateur or even getting into early stages of professional work. That is it for this one, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed it and or found it useful. Give me a shout in the comments if you do have any questions about either of these cameras, and you can check out one of my other videos here, and I'll catch you next time.